Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Grace at the Table, part of Social Action's Faithful Conversations. We've been doing this series all year called Leading in Divided Times. It's an opportunity for us to help our folk meet some of the most challenging conversations of our day. And today, we're going to continue that as we go into the holidays. Sometimes our own families and our closest circles can be the most polarized spaces, especially in these political times. We've been gathering folks who are across faith, across politics, with lived experience to help us practice more courage and wisdom. And tonight is no different. We have a really esteemed group of panelists who are coming from various experiences to help us go into this holiday season again with more courage, more love, and certainly more skill. Um, and I'm going to just intro people as I start to ask questions and not do the whole introduction thing at the beginning. But want to start off asking you all something light. When you think about going into your own tables, or I don't know if you stand up and walk around the party for Thanksgiving, however you do it, how do you see yourselves at your family gatherings? Are you the peacemaker? Are you the debater? Are you the quiet observer who, sits back, maybe puts your phone and starts to record people on Instagram? Or you just bring your paper plates and cups and mind your own business? Dr. Gilmore, I'm going to start with you. Which one are you?
So I'm really the social media person. I'll bring my paper plates and my deviled eggs and post everything that's going on and tell everybody what I'm reading about and then go mind my business. So
No,
you can call me the social media queen.
we're going to come to you for the footage after Thanksgiving. Dr. Carlson, how about you?
I would say that years ago, I was definitely the debater, and now, given what I study, I'm the quiet observer. Just like watching for things that I observe in my research unfolding in my own family dinners.
Awesome. Dr. Lover.
I'm going to say I am the quiet observer. People feel that I am an extrovert, and really, to be honest with you, I'm more of an ambivert. So when I have that downtime around family, I just try to relax and chill. So, I'm just mostly the observer.
All right. Two observers. Dr. Potts.
I think I'm a couple of things. I'm the middle child. I'm the peacemaker. So I'm usually in the middle of it. I wrote a book about forgiveness. I can't escape my family of origin. I'm just the peacemaker, but I'm also the cook. And so one thing I've found is that a real convenient thing when things get hairy is I say like, oh, I think I got to go to the kitchen and check up on something, and I can just escape and hide.
Cool.
So I might
Um,
be the escape artist or the hider.
Thank y'all for engaging me in this. I know Cardi B has an album out asking, am I the drama? I might be the drama myself. I don't know. So I like to do experimental cooking during the holidays, which you're not supposed to do. I like to cheat during the board game. So I might be the drama myself. I don't know. So let's dive into this conversation, y'all. I'm going to start with Reverend Dr. Agnes Lover. Um, you are a pastor, theologian. You help communities navigate conflict, stay grounded, stay deeply spiritual, and you're into truth telling, right? So, my question for you is faith communities often talk about peace, but our congregations and our family tables can still get tense. How do we approach these moments theologically? Like, what's the framing we should go into this holiday season with?
Thank you so much, Brian. And that was really a question that I really had to reflect on. The bottom line is that one of the great truths that we don't always name out loud is that peace is definitely biblical, but peace is not always easy, especially around the holidays when we are around our family tables where we have history, we have memory, we got all these personalities, and guess what? They have a tendency to collide at the same time. But in our faith tradition, in the African American faith tradition, there is tends to be around family, an emotional bond, a connection. Amen. We survive by trying to hold each other close But sometimes when we try to keep the peace, we learn to keep quiet. And when we learn to keep quiet and push things down, we are avoiding the hard conversations. But the Bible does not call us to suffer in silence. So scripture calls us to shalom. And shalom is a Hebrew word. And that Hebrew word means more than peace. It implies wholeness, completeness, honesty, courage. And guess what? It implies healing. The Bible says in Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, that blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called what? Children of God. So if I had to approach conflict theologically, Bryan, the first thing we got to begin with what you just said, it, truth telling. That real peace is not pretending. That real peace is speaking truth, but is speaking the truth in love. And God is not going to bless your false calm, but he will bless our honesty if we wrap our honesty in grace. And then we need to remember that God is not absent from tension, okay? That God was present. He was present when Jacob wrestled. He was present, amen, when Israel cried out in the wilderness. In other words, he is present even in our moments of struggle. So even if the atmosphere gets tight at the dinner table, it does not mean that God has left the room. It could mean that God is just doing some deep work because he's telling us to look at the man and the woman in the mirror so that we can look at ourselves, and then we can start healing some old wounds, and we can reveal what really needs to be healed. And then I want us to hold on to the dignity of every person at the table. This is so important that everybody, I don't care if you're young, you're old, you may be too loud, you may be quiet, but all of us bear the image of God. So we don't need to tear each other down. We don't need to gaslight. We don't need to shame. We don't need to dismiss. But what we need to do is slow down, and we need to breathe, and we need to speak to the God image in one another. And then we need to acknowledge that some of that tension that's around this table, our families have carried for generations. Because sometimes we're not arguing about what's happening at the moment in time. We're arguing with memories, with our fears, and with some patterns that have been handed down. But guess what? We got to name that truth, because in naming that truth is going to give us the power, and it's going to loosen what has been too tight for too long. And finally, Bryan, what I want to say is that we need to lean into grace. Now, grace does not erase accountability, but grace is what makes healing possible. Grace says, you know what? We can try again. Grace says that we are still family. Grace says that the Holy Spirit can help us to do what we cannot do on our own. So at the table, finding peace at the table, I invite us to breathe deeply at the dinner table and to open our heart and trust that the same God who brought our family this far is the same God who can bring peace, honesty, and restoration where? At the dinner table. Thank you, Bryan.
Thank you. Amazing start. I want to ask what is this, a devil's advocate question to
Oh,
you.
of course, please.
What about those who would look at the Bible and say, especially Old Testament, and say, God, tore down the walls of Jericho, right? Like that war is also biblical. That conflict certainly is biblical. What would you say to that?
I mean, to be honest with you, finding peace, and when we look at the word peace, peace does not erase the whole concept of conflict, because even in the midst of conflict, what I'm implying is that you can have peace, the peace of God that surpasses all understanding. Sometimes it's your perspective that you bring. And so I don't want to convey that peace is just the absence of conflict. It's how you are navigating it. It's the lens, it's the perspective, it's the role that you are playing. So I don't want to imply that everything has to be honky-dory, all of us getting along, a kumbaya moment, because we come with our different personalities. We come with different experiences. We come with different worldview. But that does not mean that we cannot affirm, who that individual is and see them as in the image of God. But so peace is not the absence of conflict.
Thank you so much. I see one of our another esteemed panelist is joining us, but we're able on. I'm gonna go to you, Reverend Matthew Potts, and you are someone who has talked. You're chaplain at Harvard, and you're someone who talks often about forgiveness and courage, and how Dr. Lover just talked about grace. You talked about how grace shows up in some of our hardest conversations. So with that, what does grace look like when the disagreement are personal and painful? Sometimes, especially with family, we know each other well. We like to go straight to the heart, right? Straight to the painful stuff. So especially when it comes to identity, politics, and faith, what should we do in those instances?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I'm really grateful to follow Dr. Lover because a lot of what I'm going to say, I think, is an echo what we just heard from her. And instead of going right to grace, I'm going to start with love, kind of like she did. Um, I'm actually in the basement of my church. We just did a communion service upstairs, and one of the things that we say in our communion services here is the summary of the law: love the Lord your God with all your heart, strength, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Um, and that command, like it's beautiful and true, and we hold it dear. Love your neighbor as yourself. One of the things that's beautiful and true about it is that it implies love of self and love of neighbor, right? But what Jesus doesn't explain is like, what do you do when those two things are in conflict? What do you do when it's hard for me to love myself if I have to love my neighbor some way, or it's hard for me to love my neighbor, right? Like if someone's causing me harm, if someone's hurting me, what do I do? And Jesus doesn't talk about how to deal with that. We just kind of have to figure it out and try to live up to those commandments. I think traditionally in the Christian tradition, we have erred on the side of self-sacrifice, right? I will let myself be harmed before I let the other, my neighbor, be harmed. The problem with that is, though, if the one who is being harmed if the moral pressure is upon the one being harmed to self-sacrifice, then what happens when we have communities who are systematically and historically the sufferers of harm, right? Then self-sacrifice becomes a virtue which is imposed upon people who are victims of systemic harm. So this is where a lot of my research comes from and how I want to think about this question. If someone says something to me or does something or behaves in a way, especially in an intimate setting like a family setting or a celebratory or a festival or a holiday setting that causes me harm, that hurts me or hurts someone I love, the question is how do I respond? And it seems like the only answer is with love, right? I have to respond to harm with love, but again, that leaves so much undefined. So I want to step back and think about what does love look like, right? I think kind of like Dr. Lover before me, I think we tend to think that a love is being kind of one-dimensional emotionally, when actually love feels lots of things. Love can be angry. Love can be frustrated. Like, I mean, I'm a parent. I got some kids at home. I can be angry at my children, right? The question is not, do I feel anger? The question is, how do I express that anger lovingly? When we get into trouble is when we stop expressing our anger lovingly. But it's okay to feel anger. It's okay to feel frustration, especially when someone is harming us. We should not feel like we have to suppress those feelings. We have to express those feelings with love. The other thing is, like, again, echoing my colleague's comments, I think that, love can also cause discomfort, right? Like I just took my kids to go get vaccines. They did not like that, right? But like love can cause discomfort. And sometimes I might have to say something to you that will cause you discomfort. I might also have to be uncomfortable, right? So just to make this more practical and to kind of put some meat to these bones, I have a child who has gender dysphoria and whose gender expression does not match the gender they were assigned at birth. I have a dearly, dearly beloved aunt back in the Midwest where I'm from, who has loved me my whole life and loved my kids their whole lives and prayed for us every day of our lives. And the last few years, we have hid a lot of our child's gender journey from her because we did not want to have that conversation because we thought it would be hurtful. But my child is going through puberty now, and so we were going to visit home, and I said, okay, we have to talk about it. And I sent my aunt a note, and I said, we love you. We know you love us. Um, I I I have to tell you that this is where we are. Please don't stop praying for us because this is difficult for us. Um, but you don't have to accept our ideas. You don't have to accept our choices. But if you want to welcome us in your home, you have to accept us, right? We're not really interested in talking about our ideas and choices, but if yeah, you don't have to accept them, but if you want to welcome us, you have to accept us because this is where we are now. And my aunt, to her credit, wrote back and said a very quick note, just said, "Your child is a precious gift of God, and I will continue praying for you, and I will do my best to welcome you when you come." And she did, right? She did. Now it doesn't always go that way. I didn't know it would go that way. I don't want to be naive about it always going that way, right? Um, uh, but I think what was important is, and I guess I should also say, like, I believe that she prays every day for my child still. I think that she probably prays something different for my child than I pray for my child, right? But I'm not going to ask her about that or get picky about it because I know she's doing it out of love, and I know God will hear those prayers, the love in those prayers first, right? Um, but I think what was important about it is that it was profoundly uncomfortable for me to write that note to her, to wait for her response. I can only imagine it was deeply uncomfortable for her to receive that note and to write her response. And also the visit was deeply uncomfortable, right? I think all of us were waiting for, like, if someone says the wrong thing, right? But as Dr. Lover said, both of us, I was grateful for my aunt, and I was grateful that we just led with love. I know you love us. You know we love you. I have to tell you what we're going through. And I have to tell you, like, this is what we can take when we come to your home. And I was grateful that she responded that way. Again, it's not an answer to everything, and it's not because not every response is that way. But I do believe that if we lead with love, um, the options that we have before us, or what we ought to do in response to others' responses to us, might become more clear.
Thank you, and thank you for such a strong example and one that was personal as well, Doctor. What would you say to folks who are about to meet new family, folks that they don't have a lot of experience
Mm.
or maybe even grounded love with, like meeting the in-laws for the first time or bringing the new friend around? Like, what would you
Yeah.
say to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, right setting makes such a big difference. If you're going to your in-laws' house for the first time, I mean, I think again, you have to lean into and lead with love. I mean, you're showing up at that house because you love somebody. If it's your in-laws, it's because you love your partner or your spouse and that you're trying to support them. I think that probably means having a conversation with them about how they can help you in that space, right? Or maybe they're the ones that have to have that conversation with their parents, right? Or someone bringing a new partner, right? I think in these intimate holiday settings, um, folks who are showing up are either close or they're close to someone we're close to. Um, or if they're strangers that we've invited, then just sheer hospitality. We should be, we should, we should still show that kind of generosity and love. Again, though, I think, I want to reiterate that, like, that I I worry about us morally stigmatizing anger and negative affect. I think if someone says something harmful to you, it's appropriate to not just to feel harm, but to express that you have been harmed, right? And if it makes someone uncomfortable to know that they've harmed you, then that's okay. That what we want to avoid is sort of retaliatory harm. I think that's the way we can try to be angry lovingly or try to express frustration lovingly is to name what's been done, but without trying to. Example you gave at the beginning, Brian, and just sort of because the people we know best, we know how to hurt the most. Having that knowledge doesn't give us license to use that knowledge, right?
Excellent. Thank you. All that came out the gate just swinging and serving it up. So thank you. And Dr. Vanessa Abernathy, so good to see you. You're a psychologist, theologian, author, talking about hurt. You help us heal emotional, spiritual wounds, especially within family systems. So I'm just curious, given your studies and your work in communities, navigating social generational divides, what are we confronting right now? What are the underlying fears and the needs that are kind of causing families to be divided in this moment?
Thank you, Brian. And I'm so honored to be on this panel. I jumped into the meat and potatoes, and probably some candy yams too. Um, I do apologize for my lateness. I'm on West Coast time and ran into an urgent matter that needed to be addressed. We're in high tide at the university, and students are in need for these very reasons we're talking about today. So, this time of year, I'm always talking to students about how to manage and navigate family dynamics to advance their and maintain their mental health. So, to your question, when families are divided socially, politically, or theologically, the tension most of us feel is almost never about the issue itself. Psychology and theology both show that beneath those disagreements are very human fears and very human needs, and these are universal. One of the first is the fear of losing belonging. When someone we love believes differently, the brain can interpret that as rejection. People wonder, do I still fit in there? Um, so often underneath the conflict is a need for reassurance. As we just heard in the beautiful example, I love you. We're still family, even when we differ. And then there's also the fear of being misunderstood or morally judged. Modern research on identity tells us that people fight hard, not because they want to win the argument, but because they don't want to be seen as ignorant, immoral, or disloyal to the family story. The need beneath that is often dignity. See me with generosity, even if you disagree with me. And what just happened intergenerationally in that family just bears witness to that. So I'm so uh, just in awe of that moment of grace and growth. Across generations, we also see fears about meaning and legacy. Older adults may fear losing tradition, stability, or the faith that shaped their identity, while younger adults may fear losing progress, safety, or justice. Both groups are actually longing for the same thing: assurance that the world their family is shaping is still good and rooted in their deepest values. And then for families who hold marginalized identities, disagreements can touch survival level fears. What feels like just politics to one person may feel like a great threat to safety or worth to another. So beneath that intensity is a sacred need for protection and justice. And then when we think about it theologically, these needs all reflect the Imago Dei, our God given desire to be known, valued, and connected. Even when we think about the role of anger, anger is a human alarm of our real or perceived injustice. And it was introduced with a command: be angry. Why? Because you had a people, a diverse, dispersed people coming together to be one. So if something I'm doing is upsetting you and I don't know about it, I've hit that alarm, I won't know and we won't be able to proceed forward. So, practical theology over the last decade teaches us that healing doesn't begin with arguing our point. It begins with honoring the dignity and story of the person in front of us. This is not about a them and us. This is who is my loved one. And it's often a reflection of how we see ourselves. So, I would say when we walk with divided families, all of us here and walk into our divided families, our task is not to solve the disagreement, but to minister to the needs underneath: belonging, dignity, safety, legacy, and love. And when these needs are met, even imperfectly, as we just heard, families can stay connected across real differences, very real differences.
Excellent. Thank you, Doctor. And
Yeah,
you opened
sure.
up talking about your own work on campus. And I'm curious, there's a perception that certain communities don't deal with polarization, whether they be Black communities or young folk or wealthy folks, right? Or poor folks, right? Like there's all these stereotypes about who deals with conflict, who deals with polarization. Can you give us more light about that?
Well, inherently, because we're not all the same, even if we're in the same family, even if we're in the same generation, well, there's intergenerational. We're not a homogenous group. We are all born with similarities and differences. The goal isn't to all be of one being, but it's to be of one mind, one spirit, one mission. And if, let's say, we're saying love and justice, those are important to across denominations, across faiths, across nations. Everyone longs for that because we're all designed to be in reciprocating relationships, which means the more I'm me at this level. But once I've encountered one of you, it shifts and pulls out something greater in me because I have an invitation to grow. What becomes a challenge is when it's toxic or someone is there to devalue or diminish. Then I'm not positioned to be more of who I am. You're actually threatening what God has placed in me. And that is where the heart of my work often rests in how do you maintain who you are and identify those people and places that are not reciprocating. And sometimes it's because they don't have the capacity or they're still being delivered. We're all being healed from something. And so it's important to acknowledge that with humility, with grace, and compassion, where we really feel it. And even the word compassion, the reference is related to our womb. You feel it in your spirit, in your belly. And if we can stay in touch with that and see that this is not an issue I'm across the table from, but this is a human being who God has said is worthy. They're still on this side of the dirt. So it's my responsibility to know we may have different views, but we can go somewhere together.
Thanks again. And
Yeah.
Dr. Ashley Gilmore, you're nationally recognized counselor, founder of Gilmore Counseling. You're known for helping people build emotional resilience. I've experienced that myself. And you remind us that folks can have Jesus and a therapist, which is something that was not often talked about in the communities that I grew up. It was kind of either or like if you want to get healthy, you go to the doctor. If you want to get, be more pure, then you go to church. And either one of those is supposed to fix you. So I guess my question to you is that many of us can leave gatherings emotionally drained, feeling unsafe. We've kind of talked about some of that. And from your perspective, what are two concrete practices people can prepare themselves mentally before walking into these spaces?
Yeah.
Especially when Exodus doesn't feel like an option. Like you got to go to grandma's house, you got to go to your partner's house, but you want to leave with your dignity intact.
Yeah. Thank you again for the opportunity. I grew up Baptist, and I know you asked for two, so I'm gonna give you three, like a Baptist preacher. Uh, the first one, of course, is prayer and faith-based centering. And so we know that prayer reduces emotional reactivity because it centers you. It gives you the opportunity to improve relational functioning. In a 2022 article, Pragment, I can't pronounce his name correctly, wrote that in effort to feel more at peace, faith-based coping strategies help with that. And so prayer and faith centering is a really good opportunity to feel prepared before you go into the space. I often tell people when you're entering into a space that has the potential to be combative, whether it's work, school, or even a relational conversation, prayer and centering definitely helps. What it does is it also releases the opportunity for you to respond in a way that that creates the opportunity for you to lose your dignity. And so it centers you. So I would say prayer and faith-based centering. For those who may not necessarily be on the faith-based spectrum, meditation and mindfulness is another amazing opportunity to recenter yourself. The book, The Body Keeps the Score, shows that trauma is stores in our body. And when you give yourself the opportunity to meditate and create spaces for mindfulness, you're able to stay present regardless of what conflict is around you. It also helps improve cognitive flexibility. So one of my favorite activities is the breathing exercise. So you 4-6-8. You inhale for 4 seconds and then release it. Inhale for 6 seconds and then release it. And then your 8-second breath, you inhale because it's your strongest, and then you release it for 8 seconds. This gives you the opportunity to feel what your body is expressing or express what your body is feeling, either way. But then it gives you the opportunity to say what it is that you need. We talked a lot about our panelists have been amazing and have shared that anger and fear and love can all exist simultaneously. Name that as a part of your conversation that you feel conflictual. I'm expressing a deep emotion right now. I need to step away, not leave, but step away. And so those are two that I would give. My third and final point, exercise and movement. I always tell people move your body before you enter into a space, exercise. You can walk while you're there, before you get there, on your way out, as a way to, again, recenter yourself. The sun is so powerful. Just standing outside for 15 minutes gives you the opportunity to feel the warmth on your face, regardless of the temperature outside, but it also gives you the opportunity to breathe the air that may be different from inside. And so, before you go to this conflictual conversation or this space that may be harmful to you, walk in the morning. A lot of people do turkey trots on Thanksgiving. So run so you get that energy and adrenaline out. And then when you leave the space, go and take a bath or a cool shower to let go of those things that you felt throughout the day. So those are my three. Those are my three strategic moments. I hope that was okay. It was more than the two asked for.
That's definitely more than okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So if you're like me, sometimes, you're just in the moment and you don't quite catch the shade. You're thinking about it, and then, 2 hours later, you find yourself heated, or folks
Yeah.
have phone conversations. You weren't in there. You learned that while you were in the dining room, folks were talking about you in the kitchen. You know,
It
you
happens.
talked about taking a bath. Do you have any other tools to kind of mitigate harm after the event, and or to kind of cool yourself down?
Yeah, I think journaling is always instrumental. People don't always like to write things down, but I think writing is an opportunity. It's called a brain dump. And so essentially, you're spending 5 to 7 minutes giving yourself the opportunity to write down, again, those things that you did not say, were not able to say, afraid to say. And it gives you the space to kind of narrate the story in the way that you want to. And so journaling or brain dump before bed gives you a lot more release and makes for a much more peaceful rest.
Excellent. And thank you all for sharing some questions in the chat. I think we're going to have plenty of time to get to a couple of them. So thank you. Before we dive in there, though, I want to introduce our last panelist, Dr. Taylor Carlson. You're a political communication scholar. You've done tons of research on families, how to not avoid talking, and how we might actually break through echo chambers. And so, with your work examining how political and social identities shape our connections, what else helps people break through these echo chambers, especially when, it's our cousin, our uncle, the person that we love closest to us doing this work?
Thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this panel. I've learned a lot, and I will say that I feel a bit like an outsider in that I'm a political scientist by training. And so although I'm very active in my parish, I do not usually get to sort of think about my work and think about these conflicts sort of through the lens of faith in the same way. So this has been a really nice conversation. But I just want to kind of preface with that, where my words are not going to be as beautiful as as many of my colleagues here today, and might be a little bit more technical. But I'll try to still share something meaningful. So I think one thing that I think is important to recognize is that when we look at the evidence of the extent to which we're in echo chambers, it's actually quite mixed. And it depends on if we're thinking about echo chambers on social media or in our families or in our friend networks. And these can really vary a lot. And so, for example, there's some recent work that came out of a collaboration between researchers at Facebook and Meta with academic researchers. I was not on this team, but like all of my friends were on this team. But in this project, they were actually able to look at Facebook data. So what content are people actually seeing? And what is are people actually exposed to more like-minded content than we would expect? Are we actually in echo chambers online? And although they do find that we are sorting into these ideological echo chambers, especially when we look at look beyond what the algorithm is feeding us and what people are choosing to engage in, there is evidence of this, but it is very rarely the case that people are in 100%, are exposed to 100% like-minded content. So we're actually exposed to a lot more disagreement, at least online, than we might sort of think. And we see this in our personal networks too. So, although there is a lot of evidence looking at individuals' social networks and the partisan composition of the people we are friends with and within our families, there is a degree of homogeneity. But if people really liked to avoid disagreement, we would expect no cross-partisan social ties in our networks. And that's not what we observe. And so I think it's important to kind of keep this in mind, where there's the media tells us the story that we're more polarized than ever before, and I think the experiences that we have of knowing people in echo chambers lead us to kind of overestimate the extent to which we are experiencing these echo chambers, and because they can be more salient to our experience. And so I think this is something that's interesting to keep in mind, but also connects back to what Reverend Dr. Lover was talking about at the beginning. We're thinking about how uh, like silence can be a challenge, and silencing our views is sort of counterproductive to trying to achieve peace. At least that's part of what I took away from what you were saying. And in my book with Jamie Settle, that's one of the things that we find that a lot of people do is they pretend to agree when they really don't, because they're trying to save face. They're trying to protect that need to belong and have this social affirmation, or they're just silencing and they're hiding in the kitchen, right? Or hiding doing the dishes, things like that, to try to avoid the conflict altogether. And so we find that this happens, which then reinforces this idea that we're in echo chambers and we're surrounded by people who agree. So then we don't have the actual dialogue, and we're just avoiding this altogether, both intentionally and unintentionally. And then this becomes even more complicated because it's also unclear whether our social networks are more homogenous as a result of us choosing people based on politics. So, like, I'm a Republican, I only want to talk to Republicans. I'm a Democrat, I only want to talk to Democrats. But actually, we just want to talk to people who have similar interests as us, right? But those interests become more polarized over time through cultural polarization, through geographic polarization. And so as a result, like, I might want to talk to you because we both like the same TV shows, but maybe people who like those same TV shows also have the same political views. So as a result of selecting people based on our non-political interests, we are also sort of getting into these networks that are more politically homogenous, sort of inadvertently. Um, so then I think the last challenge that I want to mention here today is that uh, the types of people who are willing to intentionally try to reach across the other side, right, are probably those who need to do so the least. So they might be the people who are already the most open-minded, the most willing to have a conversation, um, that is respectful and has grace and has all these elements that everyone has been talking about today. And so I think the real challenge is in trying to initiate the conversation and trying to incentivize people to want to reach across the aisle and have these hard conversations and engage in that careful listening, because there are people who are willing to do it, but they're probably the ones who need to do it the least. So that's my take, which is, again, much less eloquent and much less faithful. But that's kind of what a lot of the data that we're seeing on these dynamics looks like.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor. So I'm curious for you and maybe other folks on the panel. If I see somebody's coming to the dinner and I don't like what they posted on social media, or I know that their pastor they go to a different church or a different synagogue, and I know that their faith leader has different perspectives than I, is the dinner table, the holiday dinner table, an appropriate place to bring that conversation up?
Yeah, so I think that's going to vary a lot family to family, right? So I think every family is going to have different norms in what is appropriate to talk about. I think everyone hopefully approaches these types of gatherings as an opportunity to talk about your kids, talk about, work, what's going on in your life. And so, I don't want to say like, all right, after everyone says grace, then we're just gonna like dive right into these like hard-hitting conversations. Maybe that would work for some families, but I think it's important to recognize that everyone approaches these conversations differently, and it's a variety of personality characteristics, their levels of political knowledge and interest, right? Like has come up. No one wants to feel like they don't know enough about the topic, right? Things like that. And so I think I don't want to say just like read the room because that's like not a fair suggestion, but um, I think it is important to think about the overall dynamic. So like large group conversations, I think can sometimes be more difficult than one-on-one, especially if you think the majority of your table has one perspective and it's like the one aunt who disagrees or the one uncle, right? You don't want to sort of make that person feel ambushed. Um, and so I think in those contexts, like maybe the day overall is a good opportunity to have these conversations. But maybe in like smaller, more intimate settings where people won't feel targeted specifically.
Yeah, sure.
Was thinking, one of the ways that people can kind of address that, because I think we've had a lot of exercise in the last 6 to 8 years, especially in the US, to have these conversations, these growth moments. Um, I always like to call them, moments of intense grace. And the truth is, sometimes you can agree to disagree. We hear that a lot, but it could be very specific. So, can we just agree not to talk about that today? Or especially if it's still brewing and there were some misunderstandings. Part of what we like to do is we like to convince people, and really, conversation and dialogue isn't always to convince someone, it's to have space and create space to share differing views, because that's how we grow and that's how we know each other. Like for me, sometimes I'm scared to ask my young adult nieces and nephews. Like sometimes I don't want to look at their page because I don't want to know what's on their mind. But if I don't know what's on their mind, I can't offer a different perspective. I can't offer compassion and understanding. And as someone who works on a college campus, I often sit on my hands and then ask their permission. Would you like to hear what, I think may be helpful, or what other people your age have found to be helpful? Or I just say nothing until they ask me directly. Because if we can agree that certain topics just aren't worth addressing this year or during this vulnerable time where we need each other the most, um, then I think that can speak a lot. What's the purpose of bringing it up? What's the purpose? Do I want to win? Do I want to convince them? Do I want them to come over to my campaign or my party? Or do I want to increase a bond? Do I want to walk away feeling understood and understanding? Do I want to feel more loved and loving and alive? Or do I want to feel less loved, loving, and alive and feel like the life is being sucked out of me? And sometimes the life gets sucked out of the room just because someone has a point to prove. And no one wants that after Turkey.
So I think in a few ways, y'all might have addressed this question that we got in the chat, but sometimes the truth or what we believe is the truth can be reinforced by ideological beliefs, right? Or even just our lived experiences, right? So this question is specifically about racism and racism that we're confronting in this current moment politically, and how to confront those issues. If you have a family or a community that's not willing to face those issues or address them, how do you bring those up? How do you bring the things that you believe to be true or that you know to be true towards the folks that you love in conversation? Get in there.
Yeah, I saw Jen's question in the chat. I think this is the one you're referring to. How to speak in love about what's happening. I think the answer, I mean, at least the beginning of an answer is in the question, which is you speak in love, right? Um, I think I think that uh, you have to, you name the people who you love who are harmed by this, right? I love you. I I disagree with you because other people I love are being harmed by this. Because my neighbor or the stranger or whatever. I feel right. I think if one situates that response in love, it's not for the purpose of persuasion, right? But it I think it establishes you on the kind of ground where you get to say these are my values, and we have to it's this is not an argument. This is me saying what's important and who's important to me, right? Including you, if we're arguing, right? But these things get complicated too. The question you asked Dr. Carlson about, is the dinner table the right time? It absolutely depends on the family. Sometimes it's best to agree to disagree or not to talk, but sometimes the situation forces it, right? Like if my child brings their girlfriend who's undocumented, like we probably have to have this conversation before our guest shows up, right? Or we sometimes you can't agree to disagree because people I love, I need to protect them, right? Again, I think, I feel for Jen and the what her congregation's facing. And I don't, I don't want to pretend that it will make things comfortable or give an easy peace. But I do think speaking in love is the thing. Like you name who you love and why and how they're being harmed. Um, uh, and you include the person you're talking to as a person that's worthy of your care.
If I may, I think it's really important too for faith-based organizations to have mental health experts in the congregation, or in these spaces while these conversations are being had, because it creates anxiety. Again, vicarious trauma is a real thing. And so I think when to kind of go along with Jen's conversation, in that space to have a mental health professional. I think when we're at the dinner table, I think asking for clarity is important. Tell me why you feel that way. What about this makes this important for you? To follow Reverend Potts, I think defining values is really important. It sounds similar that we all have the same value, that we all want faith and we all want justice and these kind of things, but I think we define them differently. And so asking what they actually mean gives us more clarity, to not debate, but to understand what the person believes.
Excellent. Thank you. So just thinking about this moment and the season can be very heavy for folks generally, right? But especially this year with the politics, our economy, some folks are confronting so much. I want us to leave people maybe with a little bit of hope, and maybe each of you can share a moment that's reminded you that grace is still possible in these times.
Brian, I will share what came to mind. What immediately came to mind, and I know it's sensitive, but when the SNAP benefits were in jeopardy during the government shutdown, the grace that I actually witnessed was in our community. There were so many pop-up food pantries, and they were being provided by both sides of the aisle. It was a nonpartisan solution. It crossed economic lines. It crossed, racial lines. So to me, that really was just exemplary of how grace is just possible, even in divided times. I mean, that was just so apparent to me. It was great to witness.
Um,
I-
oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go, Taylor.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go because you're just gonna be way better than mine, so yours would be much better to like have toward the end. So, I was going to say that that was very tough to follow because I feel like that is such a great example. But also working on a college campus, something that I have seen this semester was that has been kind of a refreshing change was an increase in voices that I think were otherwise very quiet on campus. And so I think our university has put a lot of effort into trying to facilitate more open dialogue. I don't know if that's actually what's working, but I think I have noticed in my classroom voices that in my previous years, have been silenced, I think have been more comfortable having these conversations. And so like that to me is just sort of like, well, maybe there is hope for like more dialogue and less silencing. And then I think one of my colleagues kind of described the vibe that she observes on campus, which is basically like we care about truth, right? And we care about our research and we care about getting answers right. Um, and so we can have profound disagreements about a lot of things, but I will still bring you soup when you're sick. And so I think that is something that like our department culture has really tried to embody. And I think I observe it a little bit among the student body too, where it's like we can disagree, but we still care about you as people. And so that's not like a specific instance, but I think for me, I've seen a shift this semester where there seems to be more openness to learning about the other side and still caring for people as people. So not like very specific, but it's something that's been helpful for me this semester.
That was helpful and so touching. And it kind of, yeah, connects. I think one of the things we forget is that people have a right to their own perceptions, uh, even if that sometimes is a misperception of us. Um, when you have healthy boundaries, you have to learn how to respect no. There's some people in our lives that don't respect our no. They try to use fear, obligation, and guilt to get us to agree to something or to silence ourselves. And so when I think about, what you're saying and working with communities on the margins, I'm reminded of grace that shows up in the smallest but courageous moments. I had a student from an immigrant family where the eldest daughter came out to her parents after years of silence. And part of the work in therapy was really supporting her and being able to do that. And the father, he didn't have the perfect words, but what she said was that he just quietly slid a plate of food toward her and said, "You're still my child." And that small gesture just held a whole world of grace, and it allowed her to move forward and to soar, and it kind of unlocked something and helped her reclaim something. And then I had a African American student whose grandmother and uncle argued. It was almost violent at times about justice issues. And yet the student was able to say that, even when they always had this tradition in their family where they would circle up, hold hands, and pray, even after those arguments when some voices were shaking. And those moments where love refuses to disappear, they remind me that grace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the decision to stay connected in the midst of it.
I can step in. Nobody wants to follow that, but it's so true, Dr. Abernathy. I think that's a beautiful way to phrase it. Um, I mean, my example is related. I did a funeral recently of a public figure who worked in government, and his daughter. There were few eulogies. His daughter gave the eulogy and very, very different political views her whole life, and she wasn't afraid to talk about that in her eulogy. But she also just talked about what kind of a father he was and how and yeah, and what he meant to her, even though they disagreed. And the room, because of this, the congregation was a mixed congregation. It was one of those spaces that Dr. Carlson talked about. It was a place where there are lots of people with lots of different opinions who knew this family, knew these folks, and were there. And it was when she was speaking about him and about their relationship, I almost felt, especially here at Harvard, where everything's been so, I know it's been in a lot of places, but where it's been so fraught, there was kind of an exhale, like, oh, we actually know how to do this. We actually have been doing this for a long time. We know how to talk to each other, and we can relearn how to talk to each other and to care about each other, even beyond disagreement. So that was the moment I thought of when you asked the question, Brian.
Yeah, I think I can name so many. I think more specifically, I'm a mom. I'm a mom. I have two daughters, and they both are at two different schools with two different experiences. And more recently, ICE is in North Carolina in this very moment and has frequented one of my daughter's schools. And so creating space for her to lament, both as a mental health professional and as a parent, has been both a heavy task, but also courageous, both for me and for her. And today she mentioned that there were a lot of kids absent at her school. And so providing space for her to understand what that means as she continues to grow. Sorry, but also to work with individuals who are in these spaces that you're not necessarily connected to, but have this experience is really impactful. And so that's more on a personal level.
Thank you all. Yeah, I was just reading today that it's expected that ICE will be visiting many congregations this holiday season. So everything that you all have shared has just been filled with wisdom and hope. And I just want to thank you all for joining the conversation today. Also wanted to share special appreciation for the team at Social Action who helped us put this together. Courtney Brooks, Trinity Williams, especially, and all of the folks at Social Action. If this, again, this conversation just feels very fresh to me, even though I've been in talks about, of course, religion and healing, and of course, holding space. And if this has resonated with any of you, I encourage you to share it with your family, with your friends, with folks who you don't even know who might be thinking about these issues. I'm sure that they'll be able to gain something from this conversation. And be the love, be the grace this holiday season for all of you. I'm wishing you all courage and peace, and certainly grace at your tables. Thank you for joining us.